guys, so it is officially spooky season. Well, kind of not anymore. By the time you're watching this, Halloween is actually over. For me and many others, who doesn't like a bit of dark history any time of the year? So we're going to show you some of the coolest spots, maybe some of the more grisly, a little bit weird, and we're just going to take you around London and we're going to show you some of the darkest history and the most disgusting history that we can possibly find for you. So hold on to your hats, let's go. The first stop that we're at is obviously the Tower of London. Now this place was built in the 11th century by King William the Conqueror, and it was built for him to secure his place as King of England. But it also became the backdrop of some of the most grisliest scenes in English history. So there was the execution of 3 queens, that's Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard and Lady Jane Grey. It was supposedly the place of the murders of 2 young princes by their uncle, the Duke of Gloucester. But more interestingly, there was the execution of a mother for the sins of her son. More about that in just a moment. So as I said previously, there was a very interesting execution that happened here, and it was a pretty awful one. So Margaret Pole was brought to the scaffold by King Henry VIII, and the only crime that she was supposedly had committed was being the mother of Cardinal Pole. Cardinal Pole was opposed to King Henry VIII becoming head of the Church of England, and so therefore by association she unfortunately ended up becoming collateral damage. Her execution itself was pretty wretched. It was described that the executioner was a blundering youth, and on the day of her execution he didn't really have very good control of the axe. So unfortunately, instead of being a swift beheading, he basically hit her shoulder. The screams apparently echoed through the tower, and apparently you can still hear those screams today. Despite its enduring reputation for being a place for executions, there was only actually 7 executions within the walls of the Tower of London itself. This was actually spread around as propaganda by religious propagandists in the 16th century. But that's not to say that it hasn't seen its fair share of killings. So by Tower Hill, which is north of the castle itself, supposedly there was about over 100 executions in a 400-year period. With this in mind, supposedly the Tower of London is the most haunted building in London. So we're at the Oldgate water pump. Now you might be asking, what's so scary about a water pump? And it seems quite unassuming, and to be honest with you, I think a lot of Londoners would just walk past this and not even think about what this actually is. So the Oldgate water pump, there has been a pump in this particular spot since the time of King John, and it is also known to be the point of which they used to measure the roads in London so that you knew when you were coming from the City of London into East London, down to the point where Charles Dickens actually quoted that as he was travelling through London, once he found the Oldgate water pump, he knew that he was in the East End. But there's more to it than that. So the water pump was famed for its water. It was even described as having a bright, sparkling and agreeable taste. Now the agreeable taste was what we're going to be talking about right now. It turns out that that taste came from calcium in the water. Where did this calcium come from? Well, it came from the bones of the dead. The water had become awfully contaminated from nearby graveyards. It was said that by the mid-1870s, the water started tasting quite foul, and it had a very funny odour to it. And it turned out that it wasn't just bones that were contributing to the contamination at this point, it was organic matter. It made hundreds of people sick, and several people died. And eventually they decided to close the pump for good, so that no one could ever get sick after drinking the water again. But it's pretty disgusting, I'm pretty sure you can agree. So like I said, it's pretty unassuming when you're walking around London to not realise that these things are here, but if you do come to the pump, you'll be able to see little markers on the pump itself where there used to be a chain with a cup hanging down. They've removed that after they closed the pump so that they didn't run the risk of people trying to use and drink the water that was there. But I would suggest coming down, having a look. You'll still be able to see the markers, but it's a little hidden history fact for you there. So currently I'm standing just across the road from the famous Pudding Lane. It is famously known to be the location of Thomas Farriner's bakery, where the Great Fire of London started. And you can also see the monument which is behind me to commemorate this. The Great Fire of London was a great disaster that actually swept through the city of London, starting Sunday the 2nd of September to the 6th of September 1666. The fire started in the bakery at midnight on Sunday the 2nd and spread through the city. It actually gutted a lot of the city of London, the medieval city, which was within the London Roman wall. It was estimated that about 13,200 houses were destroyed in the fire and 87 parish churches. As the fire spread through Sunday night into Monday, chaos ended up ensuing on the streets. People ran out and they were starting to find the people to blame. Eventually people started looking for foreigners who they thought started the fire, and unfortunately these immigrants became victim to things like lynching and mob street violence. The death toll caused by the fire is supposed to be quite small, but still slightly unknown, with only 6 recorded deaths in total. But historians have pushed back on this, arguing that the people that were affected would have been poorer people and may have not had the means of people recording them down, and that some people may have been burnt and maybe even cremated in the fire, so no remains could have been found. The Great Plague epidemic of 1665 is known to have killed over a sixth of London's inhabitants, that is 80,000 people. And interestingly enough, there are some suggestions that the Great Fire of London was known to have saved the rest of London due to the fact that the fire had burnt down a lot of unsanitary housing. There is some dispute against this though there are many claims still that this could have helped wipe out the plague itself. Did you know that there's a little hidden secret at Lancaster Gate just off of Hyde Park? There's a little pet cemetery. Not many people know this because it is not open generally to the public, but we managed to find it and stick our hands through the gate, as it is actually what looks like part of the groundkeeper's back garden. So sorry if you saw us do that, we apologise, we just found it really fascinating. The pet cemetery is something that is a bit unique for the UK, and it is actually the first pet cemetery in England. It was considered a bit more of a German custom before this. The pet cemetery became popular after the burial of a dog that belonged to Sarah Fairbrother, who was the wife of Prince George, Duke of Cambridge. Over 1,000 animals were believed to have been buried there, including several cats, a few dogs, monkeys, and some birds, funnily enough. The fox terrier dog that belonged to the Metropolitan Police was also buried there, and it was thought that the owner actually was so grief-stricken by the fact that his dog had died that on the day of his burial he didn't actually arrive, because apparently he had died of grief the night before. Since its closure, the cemetery is actually owned now by the charity Royal Parks and has become a heritage site. It is maintained by them, but it is closed to the public due to the risk of vandalism. They do tours in the cemetery itself, and they are only £10, so I suggest you check out their website if you want to go inside and take a peek. Maybe, just maybe, if you guys are lucky, we might even do a tour in the future. Just let us know in the comments down below if that's something that you'd like to see. About a 12-minute walk from the pet cemetery is a little unassuming traffic island just off of the top of Oxford Street. You'll be able to see it because there's 3 little trees that are surrounding it behind me. Here is the marker of which was stood the Tyburn tree. Not actually a tree, mind you. It is the place of which people came and were hanged at the gallows. By the 1100s, it was known to have been a place of execution, and the first recorded ever execution was 1196. By the 1500s, they'd actually swapped out to a 3-person gallows, which meant that they had more room to hang more people, which was perfect for if you wanted to take your family down for that day of entertainment. And Lord knows it was a day of entertainment. Hangings were public holidays, and people would come in their thousands to come and witness this spectacle, and it was seen as a form of fun for the day. People would drink, get drunk, and they would come for the drama. It would be known for people making their last speeches, which actually ended up being referenced to a place called Speaker's Corner around the corner, where people still stand and make speeches, anything from political opinions down to poetry. So these last speeches that these people made actually left a lasting legacy just down the road from here. Despite its popularity, or maybe because it was a little bit too popular, they started moving public executions to Newgate Prison in 1798. Maybe it meant that they could accommodate for the crowds, who knows, but they stopped hanging people here from the late 1700s. Now, I've got a couple of interesting facts for you. Hangings actually created a couple of well-known phrases, one of which is "one for the road." Now, it would be a 3-mile walk from the prison down to where the prisoners would end up getting hanged. So on their way, they would have one last pint for the road. So next time you say that phrase, just think about that. Also, it's actually disputed that the word hangover comes from hangings too, as people would get so drunk that the next day they would feel a little bit off, right? So then they ended up calling it over the hangover, because it was the day after the hangings, and it would end up becoming a phrase called hangover. So they would get so rowdy and party up that the next day it was seen as the time to recuperate after the hangings. So think about that again. When you're hungover, think about where that term comes from. But also, one of the weirdest things that I've heard is that people on the top decks of buses, when driving through here, would get a chill down their spines as they were passing this particular site. And it is said that if you believe in ghosts, that these were the spirits of the dead prisoners that were hanging from the gallows. And that's why the people on the top deck of the bus could feel this eerie feeling. 1854, 500 people in central London died in the space of 10 days in what looked like one of the worst cholera outbreaks in history. A lot of people didn't quite know what cholera came from, so a lot of people attributed it to miasma, which is bad smells in the air. Dr. John Snow had another theory. Maybe the water was killing people. He decided to dot around on a map different locations and start comparing them when he finally came to the conclusion that it was this pump behind me, the Broad Street pump, that was making people sick. The thing that was odd was the pump actually had water that was coming from a part of the Thames which was uncontaminated. So Dr. John Snow actually started to wonder whether it was the pump itself that was causing the problems. They finally found out that the pump was actually a few meters away from what was an open cesspool. Nasty. Since then, the pump was closed and Dr. John Snow posted his findings in a paper. He became really famous, and you can actually come and see the pump itself. And there is a pub literally next door called the John Snow. So come and check it out and you can find out all about John Snow. Well, that's it, and I hope you've enjoyed our post-Halloween spooky special. Make sure you like, subscribe, and click the bell for more notifications from us. And remember, stay creepy. Darkness and creepiness anyway. Let's start again. Of English queens, so that's Anne Boleyn, Lady Jane. I've forgotten the names of it.
Bro, I know, right?
I keep reading it and it's not going in my brain.
It's not going in the brain.
6 recorded deaths, and it's supposedly relatively. That's really loud. She was really loud.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, let me do that again. Days in central London. Oh God. I've lost my momentum.